Looks like we're going to wait another minute or two just to let a few more of our committee members arrive.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to welcome you to the fourth instance of the Cradle-to-Career eTranscript California Task Force meeting. Thank you to all of you on the task force for joining today and our invited speakers, and a warm welcome to members of the public who are joining. Today's meeting, we're going to explore how credit for prior learning fits into the process of transcripting credit, and we're excited to have you here for this conversation. You can find related materials on the meeting section of the Cradle-to-Career website. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Kathy Booth from West Ed, who is kindly facilitating this task force on our behalf. Thank you, Kathy.
Marianne. Next slide, please. All right, so let's go through what we're going to be covering in today's meeting. So in the beginning, in just a moment, I'm going to clarify for members of the public how you can provide input. I'm going to do a brief recap of our meetings to date and focus a little bit on what it means to be looking at credit for prior learning as a concept. And then we have two featured speakers today. First, from the Mapping Articulated Credit Initiative from the Community College's Chancellor's Office, we have Samuel Lee, who will describe this effort that's underway to document credit for prior learning in the state of California. And then we're very lucky to have Scott Cheney from Credential Engine, who has been working on this issue nationally to explain how this work is being approached in other states. Then we're going to look at a series of potential solutions for your consideration, have a little bit of a poll to focus on one particular topic to dig deep in, and then we'll do some work in a Google Doc together to be able to think about some potential options. So that's the scope for today. Next slide, please. So if you're members of the public, and if you have questions or comments that you want to make about what we're discussing, please use the Q&A feature. So if you look down at the bottom of your screen, you'll see two little dialog bubbles with a Q&A. If you click on that, you'll be able to post questions. We'll be answering some things that are strictly factual, just in print form right there as we can, and other issues or questions may be elevated to the speakers for you to be able to share your input. You can also submit written public comments to info@c2c.ca.gov. That's the Cradle-to-Career data system, if you're interested in sharing your thoughts. All right, next slide, please. All right, so for those of you that have been with us from the beginning, you know that we're tackling a very complicated series of issues, which we've tried to pull together into this visual, showing the flow of information that may be needed to be able to pass information about folks' prior learning across different systems. So if you click again, you'll be able to see what we're focusing on today. Yeah, so we are looking specifically at this issue of bringing information that has been learned through venues that may not be academic into both academic contexts and then over to this idea of the career passport, which is how we would share information with employers. Next slide. Okay, so let's go over what we've talked about to date. In our first meeting, we sort of had an introduction to how this task force relates to the broader Governor's Office Master Plan for Career Education that's being developed right now. We talked a bit about the goals that the governor set for the concept of a career passport. And we also talked about particular implications for eTranscript California a tool of the California community colleges that had already been slated to be expanded as part of the student-facing tools related to the Cradle-to-Career data system. So we sort of set the stage in our first meeting in January. In February, we dug into the issues of dual enrollment and the challenges that students have in getting that credit over to a college at the point of application, as well as to be able to document credit that could be included in educational plans. We also talked about the fact that it may be difficult for high schools to know when their students are participating in dual enrollment if they are not sponsoring that course themselves. So we came up with a couple of potential solutions. One is the idea that we could create a unified transcript that would include dual enrollment information and really leverage eTranscript California to pass that information back to high schools so they would be aware of what's happening, and also then embed a link into the 3 public application forms that would allow the eTranscript California to pass dual enrollment data over at the point of application. And we also realized at that point that we probably had to work on a post-secondary transcript standard that would update an existing standard used by eTranscript California for traditional community college classes to make sure that this would be interoperable going back to K-12 based information systems, and also raising the possibility that we might need to be looking at standards across different public post-secondary institutions if we really wanted these data to fit together seamlessly. And at that point, we formed a subcommittee, which kicks off next week, that's actually going to work on building those standards. Then in March, we turned to the issue of advising tools. So we looked at 2 different places where there are challenges. One is advising the K-12 students about whether they've taken the right courses to be eligible to apply to CSU and UC. And the second was looking at the CSU transfer planner that helps community college students figure out where they stand related to transfer in particular majors at particular CSU campuses. And we came up with the idea of integrating eTranscript California with these planning tools so that we would be able to show people's actual course taking as they're doing planning. And we also realized it would be valuable to document the A through G status of dual enrollment courses, which is currently missing in the eligibility tools. So we have another task force, or sorry, subcommittee that is kicking off next week that's going to be investigating some of those solutions. And all these are subcommittees that are being put together by the entities that are a part of this task force. So we have, for example, representatives from college campuses that are supporting the development of the transcript standards. And we've got some folks that are experts in dual enrollment that are supporting us in that work. All right, so that's where we've been so far. Let's look at where we're going to go today. Next slide, please. So today we're talking about a concept called credit for prior learning, which sometimes gets the acronym CPL, gets used to describe it. And one of the reasons why it's important for us to be moving in this direction is that to date, we've been talking about just sharing academic information back and forth. I took a class here. Does the next college that I want to attend know that I have taken that course? But when we really are thinking about credit for prior learning, this is adding some complexity to that scenario, because credit for prior learning is the idea that you've got someone who, a faculty member who has determined that someone has learned the skills that are equivalent to an academic course. And so this is going to be really important as California is working to scale credit for prior learning opportunities. It's also our first bridge to the idea of the career passport. So you may recall in our first meeting, the governor put forward this idea that we should have some sort of record that students control that clarifies the skills that they have that could be shared with employers, in addition to passing records to academic institutions. And credit for prior learning sort of sits in the bubble between those 2 use cases. So it's a really good way for us to think about how a tool like eTranscript California could be expanded to include those types of learning. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's actually define what CPL is. So looking at what the American Council for Education describes it as, it's saying that colleges and universities are evaluating whether someone has built knowledge and skills that are at the college level, but they've learned it outside of the classroom. And so sometimes this evaluation gets called prior learning assessment or experiential learning. Sometimes the term credit by exam gets used in community colleges. So there's a lot of different terms, but we're really looking at that idea of creating an academic record for knowledge gained other places. So that might be training that you got in the military. It might be training that you got on the job. It might be a professional certification that you can get, like the CompTIA certification that's used to help define computer literacy skills. It could be a credit by exam. Good examples of that are the exams that are provided by advanced placement or international baccalaureate programs. So there are other exams that people can take. And you can also be learning those skills in places like a community-based experience, like civic activities or volunteer service, at a level that it might be something that could be transcribed as academic credit. Next slide, please. So now that I've described what CPL is, I want to invite members of the task force to share with us if you or someone you know in your life has ever attempted to get credit for prior learning. And so what I'm going to ask is that if that's true, either you type it in chat or you unmute and you share your experience trying to get CPL. Oh, Abby's just put in that it'd be good to add apprenticeship to the list of credit for prior learning. Absolutely. And there's actually an effort underway with the California community colleges to make sure that you can transcript what's learned in apprenticeship, which is really important when you're looking at things like teaching apprenticeships. Trayvon, tell us about your experience.
Hello, everyone. I didn't know if you guys had a chance to mention it or if it was thought of or if it's within the scope. I also spent some time in prison, so I know there are a lot of programs in prison and prior learning in prison. So take, for instance, I was able to get my food handler's clearance. I was able to get a lot of, they have a industry there called prison industries where they have real big factories, whether it be milk processing, whether it be bread processing. These are real legitimate, organizations within the prison that the inmates work in. And also there's training involved as well. Some of the training does translate to some of the jobs and some of the learning out here. So if we can implement something for them where they can kind of, translate the skills that they're obtaining in there, we know everything is trending towards us letting a lot of those fellas out. Some of them that are, showing that they are demonstrated to have made some change in their life. So if they can transfer over those type of credits, whether it be for vocationals or anything that we can, assist them with, other than just the pure academic things, because everybody is not able, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, that's a really good example. And I'll invite Sam Lee in his presentation to share if there's already work underway for the community college system on that front. Jake, I see you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Kathy. Yeah, so I think the most valuable and also challenging experience I've seen in this instance for just having other types of learning count towards job placement has been for state employees. When they're applying for positions, the civil service requirements are fairly rigid in terms of the types of experience that can be accepted, and there's just a lot of guidance around it. And when the requirements are being interpreted for placement of a specific job applicant, a lot of times the individuals looking at the person's experience are really applying a very literal, very structured lens to that review. And so we've had success, and I have to say that I've always looked for applicants in this situation, particularly when we're trying to make sure we get people with lived experience and people who represent our communities into positions. Being able to look at volunteer community experience and really just, and even before job placement or even before the application process, to just try to help people understand that if they can articulate that experience in a way that shows what they took away from it in concrete terms, that can be counted towards the requirements for civil service employment. It would be great if there could be ways to build that in so that we didn't have to every time work so hard to get somebody over that hurdle of being able to use that experience. So I'm all for it. I've seen people, in fact, I'm thinking of one individual that we were able to get them into a position several years ago, and they've promoted several times since then and are in a senior leadership position now. So it really works if we can do it. It would be great if we could build it all in.
That's such a good example. So our meeting next month is actually going to be focusing expressly on the idea of how we bring the credit to the employer. So maybe we can dig in a little bit more on that next time. I also see a note from Abby in the chat that employment social enterprise should also be included on that list. So thanks for that addition. Shannon.
I just want to flag that we have a question in the Q&A about the subcommittee kicking off next week. Dr. Lee wants to know if that's still open to have people join.
No, the subcommittees are actually fully settled at this point, but we will be bringing back their recommendations to the June meeting of this group. All right, so let's go on to our next slide. So one of the reasons why it's important for us to figure out credit for prior learning in academic settings, which is our focus for today's meeting, is that it can have a real impact on their experience in college. It can shorten their time to a degree. So if you already have a skill, you don't have to retake a class. It can therefore also reduce the economic burden of going to college because you don't have to pay for that class or that time out of the workforce. And finally, it's a real incentive. When you are being told that there's a recognition of what you already know how to do, it certainly helps make college feel more like a place where you belong. Next slide, please. The other things that it's really helpful to do when we're looking outside of formal education is that it really allows people to showcase the skills they've gained in a variety of settings. So both Trayvon and Jake have given us really vivid examples of places that you can learn really valuable and job-ready skills in other places. It means you've got a much more full perspective for potential employers because many of us have learned things outside of the academic context that have made us better workers. And then it also allows us to really move away from some of the history of bias in hiring practices. So there's a real move nationally for sort of a skills-first hiring approach, which is the idea that we're not looking first at someone's academic credentials before evaluating whether we should look further into their experience. And so we'll be, again, digging into this much more deeply next month. Next slide. Another reason why we really want to make sure that we're thinking carefully about credit for prior learning related to eTranscript California is that there's a number of places where this concept is highlighted in the legislation that goes around the work that we're doing academically. So there is Title V regulations about how credit for prior exam, like AP exam credit, gets handled. There is already a piece of legislation that requires that the community colleges take into account the records that are created by the military, the Joint Services Transcript, to make sure that our veterans and military students are getting credit for what they've learned while they were in the service. And finally, there's an initiative that's looking to expand the use of course credit at community colleges for prior learning, and that's part of what Sam Lee will be talking to us about. The final thing I just want to raise some of this earlier, but the governor is very excited about this idea of making it more possible for people to get into good jobs based on the skills they've learned in a variety of places. So this concept of the career passport, which is the employer-facing tool, is an integral part of what was hoped for as the governor was putting forward the master plan in career education. Next slide. All right. So now that we see all the reasons why it would be great to have a mechanism for credit for prior learning, let's look at the challenges that are being faced right now as we're looking to scale this solution. So the first problem is that for folks that are trying to get credit for prior learning, there just isn't a very good mechanism to do that right now in academic context. It's very local, the way this gets handled, which means that a student sort of has to figure it out every place that they might go to college. Also, in a workforce setting, we just heard Jake describing this fact that it's really difficult to help an HR department understand the skills that you have that are relevant for a job. So these two things taken together means that we're going to see real bias about who actually gets credit for prior learning, because it means that you need to be somebody who's willing to go in and tangle with the bureaucracy to have your knowledge be recognized. And that's just not something that everybody's really set up to do. Next slide. So another thing that we have, so let's just talk a little bit about specifically what's going wrong when students are trying to get college credit for prior learning. So the first thing is they may not even know that it's an option at the college that they have applied to. So they may not find out about it until they've been in the college for quite some time. They don't know how to look to see which colleges are offering more credit for prior learning than others. So there are some colleges that have put up websites, but you have to know where to find them when you're looking on that college's suite of pages. So let's say you do find out about it. Well, then you have to figure out what documentation that you need, which is going to vary campus by campus. And then you have to get to the right college staff to say, okay, how are you going to evaluate this? And this all takes time. So let's say some of the classes that you could have gotten credit for were foundational courses that were prerequisites to take the courses that you were most interested in. By the time you get your credit for prior learning processed, it may be too late. So you may not be able to follow into the courses you wanted in a timely fashion, or you may have given up and just already taken those classes. So we just have a lot of missed opportunities on that side for students. Next slide. On the flip side, this is also very, very difficult for college faculty to be able to do. So let's say we've got all these different types of credit for prior learning that we've enumerated. So faculty have to figure out how to evaluate all those different things. So we're really lucky when there's something like the military transcripts, which have been clearly articulated to classes. If you're coming up with someone's volunteer experience, it can be very difficult for a faculty member to understand how that could be evaluated. We also have a problem that colleges are beginning to sort of proliferate the ways that they are documenting learning in ways that don't show up on transcripts. So I'm sure you've heard about digital badges, there's work-based learning opportunities, there's non-credit, which is expanding rapidly in the community colleges. On the CSU and UC side, we're seeing a lot more extension courses, and there's a long-standing practice of having sort of portfolios that students might put together that document a skill set like related to coding or design. So with all of these things, institutions are sort of it's like popcorn where people are saying, okay, well, can we set up a process for this? It often is happening piecemeal so that faculty are really pressed to figure out how to evaluate all of these different options when there's no mechanism, no clear funding formula for how they can get the time to do that extensive review. And the truth is that there's just a lot of things that probably could be easily articulated that nobody's had time to take a look at, that if we could do it at scale, looking across institutions might be really beneficial to make credit for prior learning more of an option. Next slide. The next thing that we are really dealing with is that we don't have a way to really document when credit for prior learning has been issued by institutions, although Sam's going to describe ways that the community colleges are working to change that. But sort of historically, a lot of this was being done one-off in different ways by different institutions. So we didn't have a mechanism where you could even think about how you would take this credit for prior learning and integrate it into something like eTranscript California. But now is probably exactly the moment where we could actually figure that out. Next slide. All right, so now that you've heard some of the problems, I'm going to turn it over to Sam, and he's going to describe for you some of the solutions that the community colleges are working on.
Thank you, Kathy, and task force members for this opportunity to brief you today on CPL. Next. To enable our colleges to create and offer CPL, we have a three-part strategy to focus on culture and professional development first at the colleges to build that CPL awareness and capacity. And next, we focus on policy reform and procedure alignment among colleges and our intersegmental partners at the Chancellor's Office, Community College System, CSU, UC, and private. Thirdly, we focus on technology development, which is the MAP platform to create, award, track, integrate, and share CPL opportunities system-wide. Faculty are central to the CPL approval process. That's why we convene multi-college faculty work groups to make recommendations for statewide consideration. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a bit. Next, please. Concerning students, we provide the beginnings of a CPL portal to make opportunities transparent and to allow them to upload documents for college review. Next. Concerning the college to career gap problem, we have a process for faculty to define competencies crosswalked to course outcomes, supporting a skills-first hiring data outputs for learning and employment records. Next. Concerning CPL portability and availability, We're integrating CPL data with related systems and exploring with Credential Engine options for data sharing and standards. Next. Lastly, to provide one-stop shopping for our students and prospective students, really, we're exploring with you today the potential to support a verified document repository through eTranscript, California. Next. Meet Santiago Vega Jr., Marine Corps veteran who received 17 units. He's the handsome guy in the center of CPL due to the MAP initiative. This saved him half a year of time and expense. You know, veterans only have 36 months of GI Bill benefits, so CPL can make that difference between stopping short of a bachelor's or finishing. In fact, 25% of veterans report dropping out of their educational goal because of lack of benefits. Next to him is Santiago Sr., also a veteran with the same occupation, the Marine Corps. When his son got 17 units, Sr. turned his successful lighting business over to his team and enrolled in college for the first time. Mom Josie to the right, his partner in the business, decided to jump in as well and is now working on her AA. CPL is transforming this family trajectory. Now, we had originally thought that this was a great story and we've been featuring it a lot, but not so much anymore. Can you just take a moment and in the next maybe 10 seconds, think of where we dropped the ball on this story and put something in the chat where we dropped the ball. I need a brave soul. Okay, time's up. We dropped the ball by not analyzing Josie's work experience for CPL. We stopped at the military CPL and she was thrilled to get started with her AA, but now we're working with our faculty and Josie to put together a portfolio for CPL toward a certificate in entrepreneurship. Next. So while providing CPL opens doors of opportunities for those who might think college isn't for them, it also leads to significant savings and economic impact. Our preliminary model estimates that 15 units of CPL, which leads to an associate's degree or higher, has an overall impact of $67,000 for working adults and over $120,000 for veterans. The model accounts for 13 factors and estimates an impact over a 30-year career. A formal study is nearing completion, and it appears that these estimates will be revised upward soon. Next. There are an estimated 6.8 million working Californians with no college credential. I'm sure you're familiar with that statistic. If we were to set a feasible 3-year goal of attracting 100,000 of those to college with an average offer of 15 units of CPL, the total impact could exceed $6.8 billion. Next. The MAP initiative is focused on this amazing opportunity before us. Mapping refers to the process of equating learning and competencies to local college courses. Kathy described that a bit earlier. Articulated speaks to the approval process, which mirrors the curriculum approval process at the colleges, the awarding of credit on student CPL plans, and the ability to adopt articulations from one college to another to share, to create an ecosystem. And also the alignment that comes from publicizing articulation decisions on a shared platform. Pathways is about listing CPL for available courses based on various occupations and certifications. It's about using CPL for outreach and opportunities. It's about flipping that hidden petition process into an outreach process. Next. So here's how it works. Next, please. A student has a certification, such as a California real estate salesperson license, which is evaluated by faculty who create what we call a MAP exhibit, listing credit recommendations such as 3 units and real estate principles, etc. Next. The exhibit is matched in MAP with local college courses for an articulation request, which are approved or denied by college discipline faculty and made available to all other current or prospective students as CPL opportunities. Next. When exhibits are created, faculty list the competencies produced by the certification and the course. But before that, notice the center cross section where MAP facilitates the process to create the linkages and make the approvals, and it puts faculty at the center of that process. Next. As mentioned, we have a process where faculty, when they create these articulations, define competencies that are produced by the certifications and the course. This provides data needed to produce that learning and employment record. Next. Articulation and CPL award data is listed on a CPL inventory or student portal where the public can search for CPL opportunities based on their qualifications. Currently veterans can upload their JST, Joint Services Transcript, to MAP through this portal, where it's available then for college review and CPL awards. Next, working adults can search for approved CPL at the colleges, and we're working to support upload of non-military CPL documents for college review and action. We think eTranscript could play a big role here. MAP relies on COKI and CID data and is working to integrate CPL opportunities in a variety of related areas, as you can see, a variety of systems. Next. This is a screenshot of the MAP list of approved CPL. This is our portal. It's available to the public and is sortable by college. Most common credit recommendation, CID, which is the California Course ID system, occupation, top code, and other factors. If you scan the QR code, it'll take you right to the inventory. Currently, there are 6,800 students in the system generating up to $72 million in savings and economic impact. I encourage you to visit the inventory and explore the progress. This is still at the beginning stages of creating and cataloging CPL, but the momentum is gaining. And the good news is we're using a shared system throughout the state. Next. When a CPL document is uploaded, MAP creates what we call a student CPL plan, which is informed by the student ed plan and used by counselors, staff, and students to monitor what CPL should be transcribed based on the student's program of study and transfer destination. It's different for CSU than UC, what would go on the plan. This also provides a record of student decisions to accept, deny, or appeal CPL, complying with Title V. The CPL plan you see in front of you here is for Joey Mora. He's a 22-year Army MP reservist with 5 tours of duty. He received 30 units of credit, which helped him graduate with an Associate of Science degree in Social Behavioral Sciences. Next. MAP integrates CID, as mentioned before, which is key to making CPL portable. This example shows multi-college credit recommendations for POST, which is Peace Officer Standards and Training Academy. These are made by faculty discipline experts from 5 different colleges. Note how 26 of the 30 units are aligned with CID courses. The CID are in yellow on the right. This allows colleges throughout the state to easily adopt these recommendations. There are about 100,000 law enforcement officers in California. We estimate that 40% of them do not have an associate's degree or higher, but they need one to promote. CPL can open the door for them. We just completed analyzing 8 firefighter certifications through a multi-college collaborative and published those first exhibits at the QR code on this slide. So I encourage you to look at those, share them at colleges you might have relations with. Other multi-college work groups are focused on automotive, EMS, EMT, paramedics, cybersecurity, construction trades, United Domestic Workers, etc. We have other work groups planned to work with justice involved vocational courses. We had a question on that earlier. With corrections officers, we're meeting with CDCR next week, and with registered apprenticeships and high road construction careers. And we already do apprenticeship CPL for International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. And we have recommendations for EMT and paramedic. We're working on allied health, high school articulations, non-credit to credit, and the list goes on. Next. As mentioned, MAP relies on COKI, Chancellor's Office Curriculum Inventory, course and program data to speed implementation for our colleges. This eliminates the burdens on college IT teams who do not need to produce extracts for implementation. Really, there doesn't need to be any interaction with the local IT team, which is often a barrier to implementing new technology at the colleges. We are working with Koki team to support the addition of specific course requirements to create term-specific pathways that could auto-populate program pathways map. I'll show you an example of that in just a second. Another important integration will be common course numbering. This example from the approved list. One more, sorry, next slide, please. Thank you. Another important integration is common course numbering. And so this example is from our inventory of CPL, and it shows the most common credit recommendation held by students, which is 3 hours in supervision, and another one in 3 hours of leadership. These could be considered the same credit recommendation, but notice on the right side the variety of the course titles and numbers from our colleges with which we would need to articulate this in order to give each student at the different colleges the same treatment. And I'm only displaying a few of the variations. So we're working on the capacity to be able to create temporary common course numberings in math so that when an articulation is made at one college for a supervision course, it can be easily adopted by other colleges. They can adopt it now, but they have to crosswalk it to their course. Okay, next slide. We talk about flipping the CPL process from petition to offer, all to enable our colleges to use CPL to attract those who might not think college was for them. One way to bring offers to prospective students is to port map data to systems such as Program Pathways Mapper, which you're seeing right here. Here you see a real West LA pathway with icons showing CPL available based on real estate salesperson license. This is a mock-up of the CPL data that we would like to port, and we have had preliminary meetings with the Chancellor's office on how to do this, and we think it's fairly, we'll have that solved fairly soon. Next slide, please. In another example of making CPL transparent to our students, we're working with Chancellor's office to display the same data on California virtual college course listings, so that when you pull up a real estate course from West LA and you have a real estate salesperson license, you'll see that you don't need to take that course, you'll get credit for it. Next. While we're making progress on creating and awarding CPL, we're only in the early stages of the build out. Key to that will be the ability to gather, verify, and make available student documents needed to support CPL transfer and career attainment. And while there are commercial services that provide document repositories, the fees and limitations of interoperability create significant barriers to student access. Next. Chancellor Christian is determined to bring our colleges to our communities, expand equitable access, speed completion, and reduce student debt, and enable social mobility and career attainment by enabling skills-first hiring practices. Integrating CPL and eTranscript is a key component, and expanding the scope of eTranscript to serve as a secure repository of verified documents supporting the production of LERs should be considered. Data exchange and interoperability is also critical, which is why we are discussing with Credential Engine how they might help in this regard. Next. I want to leave you with Eric's story, who went from auto technician to part-time instructor at Rio Hondo to full-time professor when the faculty at Rio Hondo discovered his ASE, Automotive Services Excellence certifications. They were able to award him 27 units of credit based on these ASE certifications and trainings. And in the coming years, we will document thousands more stories like Eric's, going from technician to professor or enjoying that career advancement due to CPL, because we're taking systemic and collaborative approach to this amazing opportunity. Thanks for letting me brief you on this. If there are any questions, I'd love to take them.
We have one question in the Q&A. Will the move to common course numbering as set forth in AB 1111 further support the effectiveness of the MAP program?
Yes, most certainly. We're looking forward to common course numbering. We know that the difficulties in producing it, but it will be a game changer with portability and seamless transfer for CPL. I see a hand up with Abby.
Yes, thank you, Sam. This was really, really helpful. I posted a question in the chat, and I think I know the answer, but if, and perhaps this is going to require the Common Course numbering, but if a student gets credit for prior learning at one college, are those credits then transferable across colleges, or are they college specific at this point?
They're college specific at this point, but we've integrated CID so that if there's an articulation for principles of management at Chaffey College, that'll be visible on the inventory, and someone at Mount SAC can adopt that articulation because they see through the CID connection, that it matches up with my course. When Common Course numbering comes along, it'll make that much easier.
Yeah, I can see that. And then I mean the translation of skills from the military and certificates makes a ton of sense, and the business certificates make sense. And what you've been describing, it kind of suggests a point at which someone is applying to be a student, is already a student, interested in what kind of your and I'm so glad you and I have time to talk more next week, but how you're thinking about marketing this, because from some of the literature I've read that, student completion is something like 17 times more likely when students enter with credit for prior learning. So how are you thinking about doing outreach to the hundreds of thousands of people, and I know this is what Chancellor Christian talks about all the time, who are not engaged in college and not thinking about it, and for whom just the awareness that their experience could give them a boost in terms of college, could be quite appealing.
Yeah, that is really our long-term focus, is
Yeah.
turning those populations who really didn't think college was for them,
Yeah.
and maybe have taken for granted their training and haven't never thought that it could translate to college. So we do have that on our mind. That's why we try to integrate everything in a front door so that students can go and search for existing articulation and then upload their documents and make requests to the colleges. Now, our colleges aren't quite ready to handle all those requests, but we're hoping to build capacity over time. And like, for instance, the multi-college credit recommendations for police officer standards and training, or fire academy, or for automotive, these are valuable because they can be easily adopted throughout the system. All of our 116 colleges have an administration of justice program, and all of them could choose to adopt those recommendations for 30 units of credit for police officer standards and training. If they do, then that will be available throughout our system in a consistent way. And we are now starting to make these opportunities available through professional networks like the Police Chiefs Association or the Fire Chiefs. But we'd like to do it through trade unions, as well as professional organizations, chambers of commerce for those that are business related. And we're really focused on creating the articulations and opportunities now and helping colleges accept and get momentum on it. Then we're planning on devoting significant resources to promoting those opportunities to population.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And somebody sent me a photo a few hours ago of a billboard in the Central Valley showing four very tough-looking women in hard hats, encouraging women to enter the skilled trades and enter construction apprenticeship. So I could envision something similar there.
Yeah,
Billboards.
yeah. We stumbled on a University of Phoenix advertisement on the California Department of Corrections Rehabilitation website, advertising 30 units of credit for postgraduates come to University of Phoenix. And we thought, oh my gosh, we really dropped the ball as a system.
Yeah.
We really have dropped the ball, and we should be doing that across the board.
Great.
Time for one more question. Trayvon? You're still on mute.
I'm kind of over here fumbling with my phone. My setup is kind of wonky today. I apologize, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Great piece, Sam. It really hit me in the heart because Rio Hondo, I actually got a chance to work there, and I'm familiar with the dean. So it's a really flexible school that always wants to allow people in and give them an opportunity at their best self. So shout out to Rio Hondo and Dean Erica Leon over there. Also, I wanted to ask, your piece was very informative. And so I wanted to ask if we had any thought there with the community-based type of learning. It's a lot of nonprofit and it's a lot of, I want to say, funds and attention going towards homelessness. Like, oh, you know me, I got my talking points, but it's a lot of work going there. It's gonna be a lot of employment going there. It's gonna be very vast as I grow within the company that I'm working in now. I'm learning so much more about just the boots on the ground aspect of it and how much more of it is going to grow in the years to come as we attack homelessness here in California. So the community-based, the nonprofits, in all the different sectors that we have here in Los Angeles County, for sure, that will be helpful because there's a lot of different versions of the trauma-informed approach that I feel as if would be helpful if we can implement it in learning. If not, then we'll be spending so much millions of dollars on homelessness without any type of real foundation with our employees to kind of push a real concrete, substantive, sustainable narrative. They just there just working just to get the hours, but everything there is kind of for a goal, for California, for the homelessness. So I wanted to say those two things. And then I did also wanted to Abby's point, I volunteer to be the poster child promotion. You can put me on a commercial. I'm ready to go. I'm gung ho. So if I can spread awareness, anybody that's in charge of that, put me on your team.
Thank you. I'm going to take you up on that. So put your number in the chat.
Yes, sir.
We are just a comment slightly on that. We're very interested in building pathways to a living wage. And one of the early endeavors we'll set off on in this is to work with United Domestic Workers and then United Healthcare Workers to create for home healthcare providers as well as early childhood education providers a way to document their training and equate it with credit coursework or non-credit coursework that can lead to certification and some sort of promotional or advancement leading to a living wage. So that's really on our radar to do.
Thank you so much. All right, I do not want to shortchange Scott to describe what Credential Engine has already done in this space. So take it away.
Thank you, Kathy. I really appreciate the invitation, and no shortchanging because I love speaking after Sam because there's so much great work being done there at MAP and in California. So I learned a ton just listening to that presentation. So thank you for that. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Let me take a second and just give you a quick orientation to who we are here at Credential Engine. We're our national, actually an international nonprofit organization focused on bringing about what we refer to as credential transparency. And we do that through some of the things that Sam was talking about, linked, open, and interoperable data. When you think about it, education and training, this sector is really one of the last major sectors in our country to adopt kind of modern data formats. It's pretty remarkable. We make it easier to plan and book a vacation using Expedia, to find your way across town with Google Maps or Waze, or to buy a new car. Then we make it to find and navigate your way to the best training and education opportunity that leads to the best pathway that gets you to the good job so you can afford the vacation and the car. And it's really pretty unfortunate that that's the case. And this is important because the education and training ecosystem in this country is so large and so complex. We know that there are over 1 million unique credentials in the US alone. And that includes certificates, certifications, apprenticeships, and degrees and other types of awards that are out there offered by nearly 60,000 providers. So really difficult for any student to find their way through that morass. And in California, it's obviously just one state in the nation, but it's a very large and very complex ecosystem as well. So how do we do this? Well, if we look at the next slide, we have a series of all open source technologies. I'm going to focus though on this one on the left. It's called the Credential Transparency Description Language. And it does for education and training what the SABRE system has done for travel, which is the basic underlying data structure behind Expedia and Travelocity and Kayak. And it's the same as what's the data system underneath Waze and Google Maps. It's an open source Creative Commons license, so we don't own it, but it does allow us to have common descriptions in open language anywhere in the world. And we're actually doing this, and I'll show you in a minute, how we do this in multiple different states. The data is important, but it is only data about the credential landscape. It does not touch any personally identifiable information. So whenever people ask us, when you talk about open data, are you talking about revealing student information? We don't touch any student information. This system just touches the providers, the programs, those kind of things. So this next slide will give you just a little bit of a better idea about what exactly we do cover. We have over 1,000 terms in this language. It's very large, it's very comprehensive, and it's constantly growing because we always have states come back to us and say, we need to be able to describe this better, or an institution needs to be able to describe something slightly differently, or a counseling company or a navigation company says we need to be able to help our students by answering this question slightly differently. So this is a constantly evolving language. It does cover, just to give you an idea, things like organizations and credentials, learning opportunities, which is courses and curriculum and programs, as well as transfer values and pathways and financial assistance and student support services. So you can get a really good idea about everything that is associated with a provider that a student might want to know. This is now becoming the de facto standard in the country for describing the credential and skills ecosystem, and is probably now one of the largest repositories of open data about this entire ecosystem anywhere. Now, it's also important to look in the upper left-hand corner here and to see that reference to a CTID. That is a unique identifier that lets us know that we're talking about that course at that community college offered in this year. So it's different than that version of the course that may have been offered 10 years ago. It's also an ID that's associated with the transfer value or the pathway or the assessment or the outcome or the quality indicator of that credential. So we do a lot of work to gather all this information, but having a really big library isn't enough. We need to make sure it's actually being used to benefit students. So this next slide will just give you a quick idea. And this is very similar to what Sam was talking about, which is what happens in MAP. It's the connection of the information. And just to make sure that you understand the relationship here, what MAP is doing is specifically doing that hard work of coming up with the articulations and those agreements in California. What we're doing is saying, how do we take that data and the data in Nevada and the data in Oregon and the data in Texas, knowing that students travel across state lines. And as a country, we'll benefit if we have all this information in one common system. So this just gives you an idea of the kind of work that we're doing right now. We've actually published, Kathy mentioned ACE and the definition of credit for prior learning earlier. ACE houses a library of about 10,600 transfer recommendations at any one time. And those are things from like Sophia Learning or Google or McDonald's or Goodwill or Microsoft, where those companies will come to ACE and say, please evaluate our offering and make a credit recommendation. ACE has published all of that information now to us in this open common language, and we can now have a unique identifier saying, this is a credential offered by Sophia, this is the actual recommendation from ACE, and differently, this is the actual credit that Purdue Global has chosen to award, which is a different indicator than if Ivy Tech looks at the same thing and says, we're going to offer a different level of credits, or if University of Kansas, or if Chaffey College. Those would all have different identifiers, so you can see one program from Sophia, one recommendation from ACE, but lots of different award decisions, and all of that is in the registry and in CTDL. Now, this shows you all of this data residing in Credly, but we also have a project with Parchment in Indiana, where they're taking all this information and embedding it in their eTranscript in Indiana. And IQ4 is the provider of the LER in Indiana, and all of this data lives in the IQ4 LER as well. So open data can live anywhere. Interoperability ensures that it's actually the same regardless of where you look at it. So next slide just gives you an idea. But really the benefit here of this kind of approach is that it's not just having the data available for one tool, it's the common data available then for any tool that a state or an institution or someone else wants to build. So you're always ensuring that you're referring back to the same data, even if you're using it in lots of different tools. And Indiana has probably a half dozen or 10 tools that they're now building on this kind of data approach. Now, this next slide will give you a slightly bigger idea about where we're doing this work. We have 26 states that we're formally working with right now, and we can just go to the next slide. To give you an idea, Texas is working with us to build a comprehensive statewide Texas credential library, starting first with their 3 main education and training agencies. Kansas has been publishing all of their state and military transfer information. New Jersey is publishing pathways. The entire Alabama triad is built on top of this concept of open data. We're working with CBEN and others to publish all of their competency frameworks. We're very focused on ensuring that we're working with state and federal legislation to ensure that open data requirements are being put in there, and the House-passed WIOA bill this week does have those requirements in. And then we're working with a number of countries to do this same work, because the struggles we have are the same struggles that other countries have. And I'll leave you with this last slide, which is we're just beginning to do some work with Chaffey College, and they recognize the value of having this linked, open, interoperable data that is able to display skills to capture the information about what people have earned ahead of time in order to really be able to help them move forward in their careers. So we look forward to working with Sam and to partnering with MAP. We look forward to working with all of you, and happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Question, which is, can you define what interoperable means?
Yeah, interoperable. So let me just go through those terms. So linked basically means that if you see a data or a term someplace, you can click on it and it'll take you, to another place. It'll define it, maybe it'll let you move someplace else. Open means that we don't own the data. It is out there for the public's benefit. There's no walled garden around data. And interoperable basically means that if Sophia Learning says that this is what we offer in the course, and Purdue looks at it and says, this is what Sophia offered in their course, and we accept it, the information is just the same. It's going to be A is A when it's at Sophia, A is A when it's at Purdue Global. So it's just ensuring that the data is trusted and reliable as it moves across systems.
Questions for Scott? Great, we'll keep him here for the rest of the meeting. So if there's other questions that come up, we can put them in the chat and he can answer them. Thank you so much for sharing all the work that's happening there. Next slide, please. Okay, so for the last half hour, we really want to turn it over to you all to think about, with everything that you've just learned about what's already underway, how we prioritize what we should be doing with eTranscript California to advance credit for prior learning. Next slide. So there's really 4 things that we could focus on. I'm going to briefly walk through them, and then I'm going to ask you to vote on which of the 4 you think is most important for us to focus on for eTranscript California. So the first is the idea that we could be leveraging MAP and Credential Engine to actually build that statewide library of credit for prior learning opportunities. So the focus here is really on building the inventory of everything that is possible. So what this would allow for is that as, Common Course numbering moves forward, it would be easier to plug that in so that we'd be able to make it easier for folks to get credit related to the efficiency of that review. So that's the first option, so the statewide library of credit for prior learning opportunities. Next slide. The next thing that we could do is actually focus on taking this information and embedding it in college planning tools. So you saw Sam document how it could go into something like Program Pathways Mapper, which is a tool that visualizes the community college curriculum. But you could also imagine this fitting into tools that CSU and UC offers related to understanding whether they've taken the right courses to be eligible to be able to move forward. And if they're indicating what they accept related to credit for prior learning, that may be a great way to attract those folks who didn't see themselves as holding a bachelor's degree. So that would be our second option. Let's go to the next slide. Our third option is to really focus on how do you get to students as early as possible to make sure they know about those credit for prior learning opportunities. So this would mean really focusing on embedding that CPL process into, for example, the admissions applications, where maybe we could bounce people could upload information that would get bounced off the MAP data set, and they could get recommendations that would show up along with their college acceptance about how much credit for prior learning they could receive. So this would really supercharge our ability to give students that information. Next slide. And the final option is just really focus on how we're going to be documenting credit for prior learning opportunities. So this would definitely be related to developing that transcript standard to make sure that it's all set up to accept the options that would be coming out of a credit for prior learning repository, like what MAP is building or Credential Engine has. So those are our 4 options. If you go to the next slide, so you can see them right next to each other. We're now going to launch a poll, and we're going to ask our task force members to vote for which of these 4 things do you think are most important for us to focus on in the development of eTranscript California for its next phase. I'm going to leave this a moment, and then Rachel, tell me when folks have voted. Oops, it's saying that hosts and panelists cannot vote. Can we change the setup to make that possible? I don't know if you need to relaunch the poll.
Looks like we've got 9 out of 17 folks participating, Kathy.
Okay, so maybe it's just those of us that are helping run the meeting that can't vote. Give you another 15 seconds or so. Mia's saying she can't vote. Mia, do you just want to vote in the chat? Anyone else who can't vote, please just vote in the chat. Oh, John can't either. So just type it into chat what you'd like. Okay, so do we want to all right, can someone help me tally the votes, given that it looks like that poll is not working for a majority of our team members or task force members?
Angelique, are you able to show results?
Yeah, give me 1 second. Are y'all
Right.
able to see this?
Yeah, but I'm trying to now add it up for what people voted for in the chat as well. Okay, so looks like 2 votes for number 1, 2 votes for number 4, 2 votes for number 3. Okay, so I basically think we like all of these ideas, so we don't have a clear winner. So this is what we're gonna do, is we're gonna be moving from here over to a Google Doc, in which we originally were gonna have you just focus on one of these options, but let's go ahead and have you think sort of holistically across all these different ideas. So that means that whoever was editing the Google Doc, you could just leave all 4 options on the document. Okay, so next slide, please. All right, so if you can drop into the chat the link to the Google Doc. What we're going to have you do is just as you're answering these questions, please document how this relates to the 4 possible areas of action. We're going to ask you, I'm going to give you 5 minutes just to type in additional challenges or concerns that you have about the underlying problem, key considerations for implementing solutions, and any policy or organizational changes that you think that your entity would need to make it possible for us to have a credit for prior learning actually function. So I'm going to ask the task force members to go into that document. I'm going to ask to share the screen so the members of the public can see this document, and we're just going to I'm going to be quiet for a few minutes and give folks a chance to type. All right, given that we have only 15 minutes left in our meeting, this is what I'm going to suggest. We'll leave this document open for members of the task force to continue sort of fleshing out their thoughts. But what I'd love to do is to take down the screen share so we can just sort of see the task force members. And I would really love to encourage folks to come on camera and mute and sort of share your thoughts about like what you were typing into the document and what you think would be important related to any recommendations that would come out of this task force. So I'll start maybe with one of the things at the top where there was a fair amount of concern about there being faculty approval for this so that it's not being automated in a way that faculty are not part of the assessment process, but that it also has to happen at a statewide level. I'd be curious to hear if anyone wants to share their thoughts about mechanisms that could be used to address that challenge.
You know, that's why we built MAP the way we did, with faculty at the center of the approval process. So faculty approve an articulation. The faculty that approve the articulation need to be discipline experts who are employees that meet minimum quals of a regionally accredited college or university. And when they make those decisions, we need to be able to track and report on those articulation decisions in order to satisfy accreditors, in order to make the CPL portable to other public higher education institutions. And so it's important to have that in the process.
If I'm gonna jump in right here, I agree with Sam wholeheartedly. It's always way better when you have everybody a part of the process, everybody on board, all and just always staying key to what's paramount data, and making sure that we always pay both eyes open to the situation because it's a statewide thing, so not letting it kind of run its course. But maybe if we give them a few options, or maybe a few we have a group or a task force come together and come up with maybe a few options of administration for everyone to, maybe we can just roll it out a certain type of way and get everybody to kind of be on board with maybe 3 options, and everybody can vote on that or something like that. Something where people can have they can feel part of the process as well. And definitely promotion amongst the campuses, because that will also kind of sway everybody towards, I know the students, from the student aspect, just knowing that it exists and it empowers you as a student. Sometimes you don't feel like you don't have tools. It being modern, a lot of students are on their phones, and if they can't find it there, then that's it. That's where it ends with them. So, being that it will be readily available there, I think just the awareness of it and administrating it to the students and getting the students on board, which we can leverage, that, and then maybe, coming up with ways we can administer. That, thank you.
I note that there's several of you that thought that there might need to be policy changes like statute passed. I'm curious what you want to see in statute to support this. Jake.
So, and this is coming from a government perspective. So I feel like most of the things that we do at some level are driven by statute or some high level policy, perhaps a governor's initiative. And I think there are instances where you'll find institutions and employers and various players involved that may be impacted by the problem we're addressing to one degree or another, but I know we've talked about in prior engagements that some entities may be more motivated than others. I think if we have something that we believe strongly needs to be happening and it isn't, I think the most certain way to get there is to just mandate it, right? If we are saying, hey, we need everybody to adopt this system and we're making it voluntary and entities have good reasons for not wanting to move in that direction, perhaps their business is really dependent on the status quo. We know when we want to change the status quo, a lot of times we have to give it a little push. So I'm trying to be kind of diplomatic here, but yeah, I think you probably get the idea.
We've always tried to go with a coalition of the willing and build on opportunities. And yeah, and since we exist in this intersegmental environment with the community colleges, CSU and UCs, each is governed in its own way. And we've thought about mandates and backed away from proposing any sort of mandates because of that three-part nature of that governance system, and that's why we just really have focused on the coalition of the willing.
So that one comment was essentially the value of mandating the standards as one way to do it, because then we're just talking about documentation and we're not getting into requiring one institution to accept another's credit.
That's actually what I was thinking of, that if you had the standard, just require everybody to use the standard, whatever they're going to do with it. So I should have made that clearer.
I see. Yeah.
I will just say quickly that is exactly the approach we've taken in other states where there has been legislation or governor's executive order in Connecticut that just said, this is the standard we're going to use to describe all the data about the ecosystem in the state. And then we at least have that agreement, and we can then move forward with tools and systems and processes and all this other stuff. But yeah, 100% agree.
There's another set of comments running through here. And also for members of the public, just know that we summarize this document afterwards, and on the main page for the eTranscript California Task Force, there's an ongoing document where you can see the notes from all of the meetings. So I just want to make sure that that you'll be able to see what's on that screen. But I noticed that a number of you were concerned about employers sort of validating information. And I certainly can see that in the case of something that would go on like a skills-based, like an LER. But I'm curious about the role that you think employers should be playing in approving academic credit. So I'd love to hear more about those thoughts.
Sometimes we need employers to validate skills. If there's not an accepted certificate, if there's not an established certificate or credential. And I have heard of some instances of displaced workers who have wanted employers sign off on a certificate, on a set of skills, and the employers aren't willing to do that. So I think there's just some, exploration to be done, right? And that makes it really hard then for those workers to both even think about credit for prior learning, or in the examples we've been hearing more about, to be able to go to new employers and say, I did this at company X, I can do this for your company as well. Especially if, we have a shared skills taxonomy where, we could make those skills understandable and transferable across employers, occupations, sectors.
I think, Abby, one of the biggest challenges on that front is just getting some of those HRIS systems to be able to manage skill information better. And I think employers, from what we've heard, and there have been a lot of SHRM conversations, say in Arkansas, They're very open to it. They're just very nervous about how to do it and doing it, taking time out of running their company. So if we can get the Workdays and the Oracles and
Yeah.
Salesforces and others,
Yeah.
and they're working on it, they're
Yeah.
on board with this movement to
I
make
bet.
it easy for employers, I think they'd be willing to say, yes, please help us with that.
Thanks, Scott.
So I'm curious if that might mean that we would have maybe a different review process than has been tried in the state before for things like this. So Sam, you described a process where you get discipline experts together who make sure that then whatever gets recommended is going to fit things like certification requirements, if you're like you're in the health disciplines, for example, that we normally have faculty getting together to review these things. So maybe this is a scenario where we'd have employers be part of that review. Is that something that you contemplated in your work, Sam, or Scott, have you seen anything like that nationally?
That is something we've contemplated. For instance, we have a program with Target to train their automation technicians, and it follows a curriculum that was co-developed between Target and our faculty in supply chain automation, and the Target trainers follow that curriculum, and our faculty follow the credit coursework curriculum. So there's an alignment, and it requires that constant interaction between the employer and it's all based on a certification level, defined levels of certification. So in that regard, it's fairly easy to do. You find this with automotive services excellence certifications for automotive. What we teach in the colleges is based on the certification and the standardized assessments that they give. So that's a real one-for-one. But in areas like United Healthcare Workers, we're thinking, I think we're going to have to start, at scratch, and it's going to have folks from the industry side together with the college side to craft these. And still, you'd have to have a validation process to make sure that it works.
I'll quickly say, and I'll be conscious of time here. The CHIPS Act, the semiconductor industry right now, is probably one of the best examples I'm seeing, just because of the speed of trying to build these labs and staff up, that they are very deeply involved with the development of the curriculum, with validating it, with making sure that students they're very frustrated by not having students who have the demonstrated skills, being able to transfer those and getting faster along the technician pipeline to come to work at Siemens or Nucor, whoever it may be. So I think that's an industry that we could look at to understand how that can be a very rapid cycle of review, documentation, verification, and then articulation.
Time. So this is what I want to observe. In the last two meetings, we had some clarity about an issue where a subcommittee would make sense. I feel like in this case, because there already is an existing state initiative, what we have more is a general sense of things that could be emphasized. The fact that you were fully across the board of all 4 ideas. What we can do is write up some draft recommendations related to those 4 areas of work with a nuance of what you wrote into the Google Doc to bring forward when we look at all the recommendations together in June. That would basically say, maybe it would be a good idea to have a clear process by which faculty you're reviewing and ensuring things will meet certification standards, and that we're not getting in the way for A to G, which is really different than what we're dealing with when we're working with something that's the CHIPS Act. So I could sort of put some of those things together for your review, just to make sure that we've got an action out of this meeting. All right, are there any final thoughts from the task force before I just close with our next steps for next month? Hearing none. So next month, we're going to continue along this line and really dig into the idea of when we're trying to share information about learning with employers. So you keep hearing us refer to the LER, this is the Learning and Employment Record. And so this will be fully shifting away from the academic context, and we'll be bringing in experts who've been working in other parts of the country to see how that's going. And then from that, we're going to pull together a list of recommendations, which the task force members will review in advance of the June meeting. You'll also be hearing in the June meeting from the 2 subcommittees that will be meeting between now and the end of May to work on the transcript standard and the idea of A to G for status for dual enrollment. All right, so I want to thank everyone for your time. And we will post the notes as quickly as possible for the rest of the public to review. For those of you out there, knowing that one of our ideals is making sure that students know about their opportunity for credit for prior learning, I hope you'll be sharing things from Sam's presentation about ways that students can already, or workers can already, begin to engage with this opportunity. And I look forward to seeing you all next month. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Got my wheels all spinning.
We pause for